Hello and welcome. I'm Psychic Medium Roberto, and I truly hope you're well today. In today's case of true crime, I'm looking at the murder of Patrick Mullins. And initially, the case was ruled as a suicide by local authorities, and it was overturned by the FBI, who have now declared this as a homicide. And based on what I've seen and looked at the numbers, I concur. A murder did take place. All right, let me take a moment to focus and tune in. All right, so let's have a look here. So who was Patrick Lee Mullins? Patrick was born on October the 20th, 1960, which gives him the 10-1, the 22, and the 7, with the 3-7 giving him a 10-1 outcome. So Patrick, with the 1 outcome life path, very much an individual, very sure of himself, very independent. He would have a business mind, a financial mind, very independent, very clear with that 10-1. And with the 22, with the outcome 2 there, the 22. And I would say not necessarily ruled by emotions, but very much a people's person, would love to engage with people, always loves conversation. So with that 1 and the 2 gives us the 3, very community orientated, and we know he was a school teacher, becoming a librarian. We'd see that in the 3, very community orientated, and with those 7s, speaks very strongly about justice, the right thing in life, the right thing for the community. And that 10 is all about the group, all about the community with the 1 outcome. And I would say Patrick, yeah, we know he was an avid fisherman, loves going out on the ocean with his family, his children. But I would say a very well-rounded person, well-educated, very upstanding with those 7s. And I would say very much involved in his community as well. And I would say very friendly, very loving. Yeah, I don't think there would have been any kind of misinterpretation from Patrick. People that know Patrick would know exactly who he is. There wouldn't be any second guessing. I would say also quite a straightforward guy, but in the whole, well-balanced, solid person. So the person of interest in this case has always been Damon, who has since passed away, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Now, when I was researching this case, and even having looked at the Netflix documentary on this case, which is part of the Unsolved Mysteries series on season 3, and we see that even there, and a lot of the research shows Damon with his surname Crestwood. Now, when I was searching Damon Crestwood, I couldn't find really any information, very limited information. However, I did come across the obituary for his passing. However, in the obituary, his surname is listed as Presswood. So I guess that would create some confusion around there. And having read the article, how they described him, the day he died, all matches with the surname Crestwood as it was in the documentary. So I'm going on the surname Presswood. However, I'm not going to be looking at the names from a numerology point of view, but his date of birth being December the 27th, 1968. So that December gives the 12-3, and the 27 gives us the 27-9, and the year is an outcome 6 for him. So we've got the 3, the 9, and the 6, which gives us again another 12-3, 6 with the outcome 9. Now, if we had to look at this from a positive aspect, this guy, I would say, very much community orientated. That 12-3 would show us his restaurant activity, serving guests, creating food for guests, restaurant industry, restaurant business. That 9 is all about coming up with new recipes, new ideas. How do we keep the restaurant exciting? And that 6 outcome is all about friendships, community. So he's got the numbers for being a community person involved with the community, as well as making friendships. And that 9 is always about innovation. How do we keep the menu fresh? How do we keep the restaurant business fresh? So looking from a positive aspect, these numbers would suit him from a restaurant business point of view. I would say with those 6s, there could also be a lot of OCD happening. If we look at the negative aspect of it, that 3 is also about control, abuse, the opposite of actually being friendly and community orientated, very much in control and also wanting to control others. Okay. And this 3 would be ironic later that he would lose control during this whole event with Patrick. Now, I want to just make a note here. Just keep in mind, and we'll see in the next slide, how we build up on the day of the event and the days leading after that to the discovery of Patrick's body. Just take a note of this guy's details: 12-3, 27-9, and the 6. So with Damon, like everyone else, has the potential for great things, doing the right thing, helping others. However, on the flip side, this gentleman can be very, very mean, very, very angry, prone to outbursts, very aggressive type person. And that 9, as we've seen with the Anna and Brian case, as well as the John Benet Ramsey case with her father John having those 9s, that 9, if on the flip side, speaks about murder, speaks about thoughts of murder, and possibly even suicide. Okay. Now, if we look at the slide leading up to the day and the days thereafter, all right, so there is a lot of information on the slide, but I will take you through it slowly. Okay. So on the left, we have Patrick with his date of birth, and I've highlighted the 10-1. Now that 10-1 is going to tell the story of what happened to Patrick on the day that he went missing and the days thereafter, okay? And then I've included Damon's details, and we see there that 27-9 and the 6 and the 9, okay? So on the day that Patrick was reported missing, which was on the January the 27th, 2013, we have the 1 from the January the 27, which is the 27-9 and the 6, which gives us the outcome 10-1 and 6, with the outcome of the day being a 7. Okay. Now, very interesting with numerology when we see that 10-1, which represents Patrick. So we see Patrick on the scene. Patrick is very obviously at the scene. Now, who else is at the scene? Very interesting that Damon's numbers 27-9 and the 6 are present there as well. Okay. Now, psychically, I've been receiving a message that I keep seeing like something was being kept underwater and was being brought to the surface. Now, that 27, 2-7, if we had to break it down, 2-7, I believe in this case, Patrick stumbled upon, and I really believe Damon was definitely there with the 27-9 and the 6, but I believe there might have been something going on with that 27, a transaction between two people with illegal activities, and I do keep getting a picture of, or an image of, something being brought from under the water to the surface, and that could have been narcotics, but I do believe that 1 on that day represents money, and I believe whatever was stored underwater or whatever the situation was, I believe this whole interaction was around money. Okay, and I believe Patrick happened to stumble upon this. And at the scene we have Damon, and I keep getting an image as well of like a policeman's badge, like a star badge, and I believe there may have been illegal activity happening, which also involved authority figures, whether it's policemen, port authorities. However, I do believe Patrick stumbled upon an illegal activity, and Damon was involved in that. And we know later that he all of a sudden, or was already, taking a lot of drugs, and his behavior had changed post the event day, and I'll highlight that as well. So here we have Patrick at the scene. We see the 10, 1, and the 6, Damon. Now that 6 also talks about violence, aggression, disconnect. And I don't believe Patrick would have been killed on that day. However, he would have felt trapped or kidnapped or knocked out, however it was. I believe he was taken away from that scene. I don't believe they stayed on the water, committed the murder, dumped the body, and left. I believe it was done in stages over a few days, and Patrick would have been alive by the end of the evening of January 27. Okay, that 7 tells me, of course, a law had been broken, there was an injustice, but also from a human point of view, and Patrick does have prominent 7s, he would have been either kidnapped, abducted, but he would have been restrained or trapped or felt trapped in the situation. Okay. Now, if we go into the January the 28th, so just below that, we have the 1, ever present, all about money. We have the 2810, so there's Patrick, and we have the 6, which pings on Damon, right? So I believe Patrick would have died on that January the 28th. That 6 also talks about violence, gunshots, explosion, gun exploding, and with that 8 outcome, that tells me very aggressive violence perpetrated on a human body. And we know via the autopsy with Patrick that there was a gunshot wound to the head. So I believe Patrick would have been shot and killed on January the 28th. Okay, and it would have been away from the water. Okay, now the following day, the January the 29th, 2013. Now, because a murder had occurred, okay, the day before, so that 11:2 speaks about when the sun rose, a law had been broken regarding money, the 1, and very aggressive and violent outcome with the 6. Okay. Now, if we look at Damon directly and the impact Damon would have, how that day would have impacted Damon, that 11:2 also speaks about a shakiness, like feeling unstable. He would have just been involved in a murder. He would have woken up the next day. What is going to happen? Are we going to get caught? What is the situation? With the outcome 9 of that January 29, I believe, and I know it was reported in the documentary, that all of a sudden this guy started crying and hanging around the family and seemed to be very emotionally impacted by this whole situation. And I would say that would have begun on January the 29th, where we see that 11:2 and the outcome 9 pings directly on Damon's numbers. But with that 11:2 brings about a lot of uncertainty. There was a law broken. Am I going to get caught? Are they going to discover that it was me that murdered? That's the kind of thoughts that he would have been going through. And it would have been highly compounded with those 6s as well. The 6s bring about like OCD traits, obsessive compulsive, overthinking, getting paranoid with the 9s. And I believe that would have been the day that Damon's foundation, inner core foundation, and we see the 3 there as well, would have been shook. And I would say from January 29th is when his behavior would have been very noticeable that there was a change. Okay. Now, if we go to the top right there, January the 30th, 2013, we have the 1, the 3, and the 6. All pings on Damon. Now, it's fair to say that we don't necessarily see Patrick on that day because he would have been deceased already. However, with that outcome 10-1 tells me that was the day the body was dumped in the ocean. Okay, I believe his body would have been dumped in the ocean on January the 30th. Now, what's quite interesting, and it was noted in the documentary, and even Patrick's son was noticing that the rope that was tied around Patrick, the way he was found with the anchor to the bottom of the ocean, the way that rope was tied reflected how Damon had tied a rope at one point. And I would say that was one of the biggest clues to alert authorities, all the people around, and his son was correct. That was the way Damon would tie a rope. And I would say spot on, Damon's numbers ping all over this situation, okay? And it's not coincidence that there's the 27-9 and the 6. Damon would have been at this epicenter of this scenario, okay? And Damon would be ever present throughout these days with the double sixes there. And we see on January the 30th, 2013, I believe that would have been the day that his body would be dumped in the water. And we know then that February the 5th is when the body was actually discovered, with that 13-4 speaks about death. Now, what's interesting about the January the 31, so the day after Patrick's body would have been dumped, I believe, we notice that 5 in that day. Now that 5 talks about drugs, okay? And it was commonly known that Damon was on drugs, or was taking drugs, and would end, and those drugs would be eventually the downfall of Damon, right? So if we had to look at January 31, the murder had already occurred, the body had been dumped. So in Damon's mind, everything would have been taken care of in terms of getting rid of the body. And that is when I would say he also drops his guard. Okay? Because once he starts taking those drugs, or his mind becomes erratic with those sixes, with that 11-2, very, very shaky situation like we saw in the January 29th, that law or the murder would have been playing on Damon's mind like you can't believe. And it's evident there with the 5, the 6, and the 11-2, and it was reported in the documentary that his behavior changed completely, okay, becoming almost like a child, almost like couldn't control himself, full of tears, full of crying. This impacted him tremendously, as we all know. But I'm just putting out the numbers here that you can see Damon was ever present on the day that Patrick went missing, and not just by the by, he was right there, okay, and ever present from the days leading up after the event. Now, on the day of the discovery, that would have also impacted Damon with those double sixes ever present. He would have probably woken up high that morning anyway with the 5s. And that 7 speaks about justice and injustice on the February the 5th. And that was the law enforcement discovering the body of Patrick. Okay. So when I laid out these numbers, it is very clear that Damon was ever present, right there at the scene on the day 27-9 with the outcome 7, and injustice had taken place. Now, there were other pieces of evidence on the case. For example, the red mark on the side of Patrick's boat, and it was tested and matched Damon's boat color. So that for me is also another red flag. And what concerns me is that the detective at the time on the case that was assigned to this case was the detective's first murder case. Now, there's always got to be your first, no problem. But what concerns me is if it was the detective's first case, surely there would have been I don't know, like a mentor or a supervisor or a partner that would assist in this. We're talking about a homicide. And very convenient that it was immediately said as a suicide, because I do believe with that 27-9 on the day, that tells me there were authorities involved here. And I strongly believe there were authorities involved here, whether it was just one person with Damon, but there was definitely authorities involved here. And I find it very coincidental that the camera on the bridge, or the camera would have picked up the empty boat of Patrick's vessel, that file would have become corrupt. The day before was fine, the day after was fine. So that also raises suspicions for me. And of course, we can all appreciate that files can be corrupt. It happens with us as well. When I was working in the industry, a file can easily become corrupt. But I must say, it was very rare that a file would become corrupt. Very rare. It happens, but very rare. Okay, so I find it very interesting that the camera at that bridge became corrupt and wasn't available to review the footage or the surveillance. So that also raises the suspicion that there were authorities involved, and the fact that this case was treated as a suicide right off the bat, when we know that Patrick was a family man, loving husband, loving educator, there for the kids, there for the community, that would all of a sudden one day take a shotgun which he didn't own and shoot himself, and that shotgun's never been found. Authorities use shotguns as well. So that 27-9 on that day also alerts me, and I'm seeing that image again of a badge. There was definitely some kind of authority involved in the situation, and what they were bringing out the water was related to money. So I believe with that image of something being taken out of the water, the image of the badge, there was definitely illegal activity going on, and there could have been authorities involved here, whether it was a smaller unit of drug trafficking or picking up drugs or picking up money out of the water, exactly how we saw in that movie with Mark Wahlberg, right? Where they would dump the money in the ocean and later they would bring it to the surface. I believe this was the same situation, okay? And Patrick would have stumbled upon it, and I believe Damon was involved, and Damon was present at that scene, and the murder would have occurred somewhere else. Patrick would have been taken captive and held for a short period of time, and he would have been done with the following day. So very concerning that the numbers also reveal authorities at the scene, police were at the scene pre or during the incident, and I'm not talking about the authorities that would have been there after the event. There was definitely some authority figures involved in the situation as well, and there was definitely more than Damon at that scene. Okay, so here we have an unfortunate death that Patrick had stumbled across a situation all about money, all about breaking the law, smuggling, and Patrick would have stumbled upon this, unfortunately. And this, in my opinion, was definitely not a suicide. There was definitely a murder, a very violent murder, and it was all about money. All right, if you would like to leave your comments, please feel free to leave your comments. I do read all the comments, and please hit the subscribe button and the notification icon if you'd like to be alerted to future uploads. And I would just say stay safe and stay alert.